I want us with. Did you say Fifi Kwete?
Sorry, Honorable Titus Global.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted a nominee to assist us. There's a small gap. When you look at Empretech Project Ghana, where I was a national director in October 1990, August 1994. Between 1991 to 1993, I'm sure you might have engaged in something. You did 1991 to 1993. Then when you come to, I think, I'm done. It's okay. I'm clear.
Well, Honorable Chief Whip.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, usually I don't come on CV, but something very interesting. Did I hear him say that he goes to Addis Ababa at the age of 9?
Yes, that's after my primary school education.
What age did you go to primary school? I'm sorry, I'm asking you because even though you say it's on the CV, because if you arrived there at the age of 9.
Yeah.
How old were you when you went to primary school?
Well, I went to class 1 at the age of 4. I only responded to it because it was a question that was posed. But I went to class 1 at the age of 4. And I went through 6 years. I sat a common entrance at the age of 9 and was admitted.
So
to secondary school.
I don't know whether I'm hearing you right. You said you went at the age of 4.
Yes.
And you sat...
Class 1.
You went to class 1 at the age of 4. You spent 5
4,
years.
5, 6, 7.
You spent 6 years in...
Mr. Chairman, on personal profile, under our region, the nominee said Anglican and Christian. Do you want to correct it?
Mr. Chairman, honorable member, I said Anglican stroke Christian, meaning it's a subset of Christianity. That is the intention. That was to convey.
It's understandable.
Stroke is all.
Okay. Shall we proceed to the main questions? Honorable nominee, I want to start myself. I have been thinking about what is contained in the MPP manifesto, which has been touted as the basis for transformation, the transformation agenda. If you look at the transformation agenda, it's heavily dependent on what your ministry is set out to do. Can you tell us exactly what it is that should make us believe that if you deliver, you will transform the economy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as we would all recognize, the title of our manifesto was Change an Agenda for Jobs. Now, the position of our party is that one of the most powerful instruments for creating jobs is industrial transformation. And so the focus of our agenda for job creation is through industrial transformation. And there are 6 main pillars of this agenda. First is improving the competitiveness of existing local industries. Clearly, there is value in starting new industries, but we want to look at existing companies, help them to become more competitive. And so that's the first element of our agenda for industrial transformation. And we are working towards being able to provide a stimulus package for existing industries, which will involve us undertaking a diagnostic study of these companies and identifying exactly what it will take for them to become more competitive. Because we believe that if they are able to enhance their competitiveness, they will be able to create more jobs and also enhance our revenue generation. The second is the One District, One Factory initiative. We recognize that even if, admittedly, it is useful to support existing companies, we recognize that the concentration of existing industries, either by chance or design, is in the major cities of Ghana. So the One District, One Factory initiative is designed to do a number of things. First, to create massive employment all over the country. And secondly, to add value to our natural resource base. Thirdly, to identify potential strategic export commodities, which then would help our export revenue generation. Fourthly, also to identify import substitution products that could also help us reduce our expenditure, foreign exchange expenditure.
Okay. Chairman, if you permitted me, since you are rolling competitiveness of local industry, what will you be seeking to do and within what timelines?
Initially, we would undertake a diagnostic study. Let's take for granted we have 100 companies that we believe are potentially viable but are currently distressed. We, as I sit here now, will not be in a position to determine the specific support that they need to improve their competitiveness. So the starting point is for us to do an audit of these companies, identify exactly what they require to become competitive. And then we'll provide a comprehensive package of support to help them improve their competitiveness.
Honorable, we'll be relying on your competence and expertise. What will you roll out as a package to enhance competitiveness?
Mr. Chairman, even at the risk of sounding competitive, I'm suggesting that the only way we can come to a determination as to what they require to become competitive is to do a diagnostic study. Some of the companies may only need marketing support. Some may require an infusion of new technology. Some may require additional investment capital. So it is important that we do it on a case-by-case basis. But just to add, Mr. Chairman, that the important thing is for our private sector to appreciate and recognize that the government is committed to making sure that the private sector survives and leads the process of transformation. And that is why we are starting with existing companies.
Can you identify for this committee 4 major interventions you do for the Ghanaian private sector? Elaborate.
First, if the reference is to our previous term of office in government, is that the understanding, or I remember?
Both past and into the future, what will you do for the private sector of Ghana? You are free to share your previous, but we are more interested in going forward.
First is facilitating access to capital, particularly medium to long-term capital. We all recognize that it is not as if the banks in this country do not provide credit and financing, but we know it is the tenor of the credit that they provide which is a challenge for our companies. So our first focus will be on facilitating access to medium and long-term capital. It is in this regard that we've made a number of commitments. First is to refocus the operations of the National Investment Bank to provide medium to long-term credit. Secondly, we've proposed the establishment of an industrial development fund, which would literally do the same thing. And also, we've talked about reviving and recapitalizing existing financial intermediation that would also produce the same thing.
Thank you, Mr. Nominee. You've just mentioned capital for the private sector, where you have a government which overcrowds the private sector and a prohibitive interest rate regime. What
power. So if it is the record of the previous government that we are talking about having crowded out the private sector, then unfortunately I may not be able to respond to that. But what we intend to do is to make sure that government limits its borrowing from the financial sector, particularly from the banks. Now, once you do that, the banks have literally no option but to increase the delivery of capital to support businesses. So that's the first thing. Secondly, if we reduce the treasury bill rate, then it reduces the appetite of banks to lend to government. And that also will release more funds to support the private sector. So those are two things that I know we intend to do.
Okay, can you come back on track? You were telling us how...
so that's for the one district, one factory. It is not a substitute for the stimulus package for existing companies. It is complementing it. The third element is the establishment of a number of strategic anchor industries, including the petrochemical industry, iron and steel industry, an integrated aluminium bauxite industry, the pharmaceutical industry, vehicle assembly and automotive industry, and then also, last but not the least, the manufacturing of machinery and equipment and components. Now, the reason why we are focusing on these mega anchor industries is because we are talking about transformation. The stimulus package for existing companies will make a contribution. There's no doubt about that. The one district, one factory will make a contribution. But if you are looking at transformational change, then you're looking at these anchor industries that would have a fundamental, long-lasting effect on our economy. So that is the third component. The fourth component is to now zero in on domestic trade. If we're going to support local industries, then obviously we have to be concerned about how we help them with their domestic trade agenda. And so we'll be looking at a number of interventions helping to improve and modernize domestic retail infrastructure. We all know what has been going on in our markets. So that's a very important part of what we want to do. We also want to use our local contact provisions, legislation, to support the consumption of locally made goods. Now, the fifth component is to promote exports. Again, if we did all that I've talked about and do not focus on how we expand our export base, we will not generate enough foreign exchange to support our local currency. So underpinning all this is a very aggressive program to support export development. I mean, for over a century, we've been relying on cocoa, gold, and timber as our major export crops. And we believe that it is time for us to look at export diversification. And in this regard, we are not going to just look at our export destination that has served us well for many years. We're going to concentrate on the continental and regional markets. I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, it will be pleasing for members to note that there's something major going to happen in Africa, which is not yet on the radar of many countries, which is Africa is going to become a common market, a continental free zone by 2017. So those countries who would take the lead in transforming their productive infrastructure through industrialization now would have an opportunity to export to the whole of Africa duty-free, quota-free. So that is also the basis for our export program. We will still look at AGWA because I think it provides significant opportunities for export revenue generation. And of course, the EPAS is also an opportunity for us to diversify. Last but not the least is business development and investment, particularly in respect of small business promotion. And we are proposing a new entrepreneurship and innovation plan, which will enhance our support to small and medium enterprises. So these are the 6 strategic pillars underpinning our industrial transformation agenda. If we had time, I could go into more detail.
Thank you. One more from me. If I am ready now to join in the One District, One Factory program, how would I interface with the government?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, the Ministry of Trade and Industry has committed to the establishment of a technical support group. Now, this technical support group will do a number of things. First, we're going to interface with all the district assemblies, help them identify strategic economic projects which can be designated as district enterprise projects. Again, for purposes of clarification, this may include existing industries that are located already in a particular district. So that will be the first point of interface. Once we agree with the district assembly a number of potential projects, we would, again, with the help of the district assemblies, identify potential investors or entrepreneurs, hopefully those who come from those districts. And I suspect that in every district in Ghana, it is possible to identify 1 or 2 entrepreneurs who are interested in leading the establishment of a commercially viable enterprise in that particular district. And in this regard, our technical support group will be meeting particularly with the members of parliament, because even though your oversight is over constituencies, we believe that members of parliament will be a major resource to help support the One District, One Factory initiative. So we'll be having that interaction. Once we get interested potential partners, at this stage, these are only potential partners, our technical support group will work with these potential partners to develop a business plan. This is all part of the facilitation to be provided by government. Now, once the business plan is prepared, it is only at that point that we can determine the exact costs of implementing that particular project. But again, for the avoidance of doubt and just for purposes of clarity, when we talk about a district enterprise project, we are looking at a medium to large scale factory or industrial enterprise that has the potential to fundamentally affect the economy of the district. I'm making this clarification just so that we don't confuse that with our business development agenda, which will support small and micro enterprises. So once the business plan is prepared and we come to an agreement as to what configuration of public-private partnership will be required to move the project forward, the government is very flexible. If it were possible for the private sector investor that we identify to take 100% equity in this project, all the better. But we hope that government would also, apart from providing additional equity to support a program like this, will provide contribution in kind. Whatever it takes for the government to make sure that this district enterprise is realized, government commits to do that, including infrastructure support, access to technology, and so on and so forth. So there will be a secretariat within the ministry that will be the first point of contact of potential investors, district assemblies, and any other interested parties.
Chairman, I may have a follow-up. Just to paraphrase you, whatever it will take to get it realized, you will do. You have an idea how much it will cost to implement the one factory, one district program?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as I indicated, it is only when a business plan for a particular district enterprise is completed that we'll know the cost. Once we know the cost, we have to come to an agreement with the potential investor what kind of equity, debt proportion, government's contribution that will be desirable. So we are not talking about state enterprises where government says that we are putting X million cedis behind a particular project.
Thank you. So how do you intend to finance it? What will be government's role in the financing of those initiatives?
In any particular situation where government determines it is desirable to actually invest equity funds in a particular project after consultation with a private sector investor, there is an agreement in principle, and I'm talking about agreement in principle, for government to allocate a certain percentage of the $1 million that is intended now to go to every constituency, a percentage of that to support each particular district. I mean, the details will be worked out. That is one component of how government will support its financial contribution. Secondly, we are talking about viable commercial enterprises. So if government even has to borrow to be able to provide equity to support a private sector investor, why not? I mean, we are able to borrow on the capital markets to fund infrastructure projects which may not necessarily have commercial returns. So apart from the commitment that we'll be making through these funds going to the constituencies, I am suggesting that we would make sure that both from the consolidated fund and from our own innovative ways of raising finance from the capital markets, we'll be able to support the financing requirements of any of these projects.
Honorable nominee, congratulations once again.
Thank you, Madam.
Just a follow-up on an earlier statement that you made, that in finding potential investors to partner government in providing the one district, one factory, you would set up a secretariat to do that.
Yes.
I want to ask, how would that secretariat be working with the GIPC, the Ghana Investment Promotion Center? How do you intend to cooperate or collaborate with that center in the performance of that duty? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A very important question. Honorable Member, what we intend to do is to work very closely with the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. Already I talked about the sixth component of our transformation agenda, which is business development and investment. And GIPC is one of the institutions that is established to support investment promotion. And so when we work with the district assemblies to identify individuals, it will only complement also efforts of the GIPC, who normally would have people going to them interested in supporting investment projects in the country. So that will be one channel or pipeline of potential investors. The other would be from our interaction with the district assemblies. And also, as soon as we prepare a business plan for a potential district project, we would organize what we call an investment forum, which will then have all the profiles that have been prepared showcased to potential investors who would be invited. So GIPC potentially will be one of the institutions that would invite investors, potential investors, into these investor fora to discuss the possibility of investing in these companies. So maybe for clarification, if the MP for Laura is spearheading a major industrial establishment in his constituency or district.
Why Laura and not Domi Kwabenya?
And then Domi Kwabenya. Our first interface will be with the district assembly to help us identify potential investors. Secondly, we'll rely on the MPs to help us identify potential investors. The GIPC will be contacted if they have interest established in identifying projects in any of these districts. And then the investment forum would also be an open forum to attract other investors.
Very well. Honorable Yele Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the nominee has indicated the steps that they want to take to realize the lofty ideals that have been in this book called the Manifesto. I want to find out from him, when will the first factories be done? Because some chiefs have already allocated land, and you are going to start with studies. I want to know, when should we expect this one district, one factory to be realized? Will it be within the 4 years? That's my question.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very important clarification that is being sought. And, Mr. Chairman, on a lighter note, I don't know whether this is permissible under the rules of this House. When we were waiting for the results of the general election, I think somebody who understandably was impatient that the results were not being declared by Madam Charlotte Osei went on radio and said, Madam Osei, if over these last 3 days you had declared the results, Alan would have built 3 factories by now. Now, in his own mind, it is 1 day, 1 factory. But unfortunately, that's not what we committed to. We were committing, and I want to choose my words carefully, we were committing to work with the private sector under a PPP arrangement to establish at least 1 factory in every district. The reason why I said it's a very important clarification is that the normal gestation period for a new factory will be maybe 1.5 years. You know, in some cases, 2 years. In some cases, it could be 1 year. But I want to clarify that our starting point is to look at existing companies that are viable, that potentially could qualify under the criteria of a district enterprise project, and actually support them to become a district enterprise. So, Honourable Member, depending on how things go and the appetite of our members of parliament, our district assemblies, our private sector to work with this program, potentially you could have within a matter of 6 months a number of district enterprises already underway. Because all these elements of the program that I talked about feed into each other. Once we do the diagnostic study of these existing companies, it is possible that some of them may qualify to become a district enterprise. That is, if they fit the criteria for a district enterprise. So it is difficult to give a specific answer to that. But I can assure you that there's a lot of goodwill within the private sector to support this particular program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The general idea of one district, one factory, and particularly during the campaign period, the idea was that you have occupied this in the ministry before, and you undertook some development in terms of factories, including the cassava one.
Yes, sir.
Now, again, the impression was created that you have already identified these, and some people started giving names to what type of factory will be at what location. Now, you are saying that you are now going to find out, conduct studies. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Are you saying that at the time you were promising one factory, one district, no idea about the resource base of each district or government diagnostic study which show that potentially each district can get a factory? Are you saying that that was not done and now we are going to begin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think a very important question that helps us provide more clarification. This one district, one factory initiative is actually an initiative that we started during our previous term of office in government, and I superintended this particular initiative. By 2007, at least when I was exiting from my position, there were 110 districts at that time. We had done consultations with the district assemblies, identified 3 projects in each district, done diagnostic studies, prepared business plans, full business plans, had consultations with, a number of investors, and literally we were on the verge of taking off. Now, all these business plans, 100 business plans, 100 business plans had been prepared with the support of the ministry, which meant that the national endowments had all been done. So I think that our successor government had the opportunity actually to implement what had been done. Now, I'm not too sure exactly what the state is now with what was done before. But I take a position that if you prepared a business plan in 2007 and you intend to support, let's say, a particular project, it will only be reasonable that you review the old business plan. At least you have basic information. And if the figures have to be updated, you would do so. But just to confirm, Mr. Chairman, that we've done an extensive study of all the districts, because the 110 districts still encompasses many of the districts that we have now. We have an extensive study undertaking on all these districts, and this was in consultation with the district assemblies. So I think a lot of work has been done.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Once again, the minister is designated is talking about business development. But among the list of nominees, the president has appointed somebody to be in charge of the business development. How will your ministry work with that new scheduled minister?
Mr. Chair, as far as my understanding goes, what the president has done is to appoint ministers in the office of the president to do a number of things. Now, in the particular case of Minister for Business Development, my understanding is that because private sector development is at the center of our national development agenda, the president requires one to have a liaison between the implementing ministry, which is the Ministry of Trade and Industry, between the implementing ministry and then the office of the president. That's number one. It is perfectly legitimate and understandable for the president to have a general oversight of some of the key initiatives that he is committing to. So a Minister for Business Development, as I think the president has explained, is not there superintending over a ministry. The implementing is done at the sector, at the ministerial level, sector ministry level. And then we have a contact point or a liaison in the office of the president responsible for liaising between the sector ministry and then the office of the president. That is my understanding.
Chairman, I may come with a follow-up. So your understanding of the Minister for Business Development will be largely done of a liaison officer. So for our purposes, which ministry will be responsible for the private sector of Ghana in your consultations with the president?
In my consultation with the president, there is clarity that it is the Ministry of Trade and Industry that has primary responsibility for our trade, industrial investment agenda, and private sector development. And again, just to further clarify this position, this was something that the president said openly to members of the business community even before he made these formal appointments. I have no further indication that he intends to do otherwise. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Obiamwa.
It's not ready.
Yeah, no, okay. Then I go to Title, you took your chance, didn't you? Oh, all right. Okay. Titus, right.
Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, this is better. Captains of industry, members of AGI have made serious complaints about the challenge and difficulties they went through in the previous regime, i.e., where the government is struggling with them in the quest for credits at our local banks, making cost of business so difficult, high taxes, tariffs at the port. Your ministry, from the understanding that we had from Honorable Yosafo Mafo, is one of the economic ministries. And for that matter, with this background that I've given, and your experience in the very ministry that you're going to serve, what are you going to do to make sure that members within the trade and industry fraternity will have that sort of respite to enable them to produce, create jobs for the teeming youth in our country? So can you share with the committee what exactly, in terms of policy direction, that you could really bring on board, at cabinet level, that will facilitate the businesses that we're going to do are going to have that sort of room for them to do better than before? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Member, I think part of the response lies in the belly of what I've said before, because all the 6 components of our industrial transformation agenda is really meant to support the private sector. But for emphasis, there are a number of things that the business sector has been worried about. First is general business environment in terms of regulations, even to the extent of how long does this take to register a business. So there are interventions designed to improve the regulatory reform, the legal and regulatory reform, which will be part of what the ministry will be engaged in. If you talk about access to land, that is part of the challenge that currently confronts the business sector. Access to energy. We've talked about access to finance. So whether it is in the component that deals with business development and investment or with improving the competitiveness, these are all elements that are meant to help the private sector. Now, unless a particular company comes with a very specific challenge that is not generic, if that is the case, then we are committed as a ministry to provide a direct response to that. Otherwise, what I've described in general is meant to cover every conceivable challenge that the private sector will be more or less complaining about. But just also to add, Mr. Chairman, that on a continuous basis, we believe that it is important for government to dialogue with the private sector to be able to continuously address challenges as they come, because business is dynamic. And so there's a private sector government dialogue mechanism that will be introduced where the government, particularly the president and senior members of government, will have the opportunity of dialoguing with the private sector in a structured environment every year. And I think that will give further opportunity for us to determine the needs of the private sector.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Gratis Foundation is one of the institutions that falls within your ministry. And my understanding, I'm speaking from my background as a member of the Trade and Industry Committee. Anytime budget is read in our consideration stage, at committee level, we realize that Gratis Foundation is underfunded. And their target basically is at a small scale level. What are you going to do? In as much as we are looking at the medium term and the large scale, one district, one factory, we must not lose the fact that the small scale, like you said, is equally important. What are you going to do to really support Gratis Foundation so that they can also have the full grounding to speed up the development that we're looking for? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, there are a number of agencies operating under the ministry, which includes Gratis. What we propose to do very early on when I received the nod and have the opportunity to lead the ministry again is to do an institutional audit of all these agencies, including Gratis, to be able to identify exactly what it takes for us to make them more effective in their operations. And so in that regard, we'll be looking at institutional renewal, which would also include human resource capacity development. And I suspect in the case of Gratis, a reorientation of their own technology improvement program. Because I think we are in a globally competitive environment which requires us not necessarily to stick to primary research in technology, but sometimes look at adapting existing technology. So the focus of Gratis may need to change. I mean, if you can buy an existing equipment and then model it to suit local purposes. You don't want a situation where you are starting from scratch, trying to build, let's say, a piece of equipment right from scratch. So it will all depend on the institutional audit that will be undertaken. But I can assure you that because we are focusing on small and medium enterprise development, and then also one of the anchor initiatives that I discussed was the manufacture of equipment and machinery parts. So Gratis already, you can see that Gratis has an entry point into our development agenda.
Mr. Chairman, my last question. I asked this question from our finance minister nominee, and I want to repeat it here. The Jubilee Fields, a lot of money is going down the drain because we are not independently monitoring the production of this oil. Why? Because another institution, God willing, when you go to the ministry, is Ghana Standard Authority. Under the National Liberation Council Decree 326, they are supposed to independently measure and weigh all instruments that are being used by institutions with their own machines. Unfortunately, they don't have one by the Standard Authority at the Jubilee Fields. They are praying for what they call metrology laboratory. He gave a very good answer here. And because the Standard Authority comes under your ministry, it must be initiated through the Standard Authority to your office, then to the Finance Ministry. Can you assure us, because Ghana is losing colossal amount of money, because we don't know the true losing amount of money, because the Standard Authority is not having access to the true.
Your question, please. Please proceed to ask your question.
Cool down. Please cool down. Let me ask my question. Are you going to assess your institution so that they will have the funding from the Finance Ministry, so that we have the laboratory to police the true production of the oil at the Jubilee Fields? Thank you.
Honorable Member, I can assure you that I'll be the lead advocate to have that issue addressed. Because in actual fact, if you look at the mandate of the Ghana Standards Authority, it is a major part of their responsibility to deal with metrology. And so it must be something that ought to have been done as a matter of course. If it is not being done, it has to be done. And I think that ideally, if we can get private sector participation to support this exercise, it will even be better. Because the private sector would also bring their experience to support the Ghana Standards Authority. But if we are looking at a major resource of our country and there is no indication of accountability, then that's a very serious gap. So I'm already a convert in that respect.
Nee Lante van der Poel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Minister Designate for Trade and Industry, my first question, since you've hammered so much on one district, one factory, let me ask the question. What national malaise is this one district, one factory aiming to cure? Job creation or trade?
Mr. Chairman, both.
That is just to set the tone for you. Thank you. Perchance, between 2009 2010, a study was conducted on rural enterprises development, and findings have been made. Have you seen a copy of this? And if you have, by MBSSI, one of the salient points that came out from that study is that 80% of small and medium scale enterprises are supposed to be supported through the MBSSI. What are you going to do to drive the agenda of SMEs in Ghana and to ensure that these SMEs are competitive enough to withstand foreign competition and also foreign invasion?
Thank you, Chair. A number of the things, some of which I've already alluded to in our plan to support private sector development and industrial transformation. But specifically, in respect of small and development, number one is to reduce the cost of doing business. That includes reducing the taxes that are currently, taxes levies currently imposed on these companies. It also includes facilitating access to finance, which I've already talked about. We've discussed the issue of supporting market development interventions, which is also helping them to promote their goods. We've talked about access to technology. Now, these are all challenges currently confronting the small and medium enterprises. So we are going to ensure that in the 6 areas that we've already discussed, that at the center of our interventions will be the small and medium enterprises, not leaving out the micro enterprises, but essentially the small and medium enterprises. Basically, this is going to be the focus of what we'll be doing.
You mentioned trade facilitation, domestic trade, severally. The previous government had a foresight of improving on domestic trade, and so started with the rebuilding of some of our old markets, Kejetia market, Kotokraba market, Ho market. Sword was cut for Salaga market. In your answer, you'll be supporting trade facilitation. One, are you going to continue with this policy of rebuilding our markets? Two, what are you going to do to ease doing business within our domestic trade?
Honorable Member, I think I must put on record that the work that was done by the previous government in terms of at least initiating the process of building new modern market infrastructure is in the right direction. And so it's consistent with what we propose to do. So we'll definitely continue that exercise and even extend it much further. In respect of your second question, I think a lot of the things that I said before were intended to address that particular issue.
The second one, let me say this. I am more looking at an angle. That's why I say I'm not looking at the previous answers. In the domestic markets, we have problems within the domestic trade. Foreign competition from foreigners and all those things leading to closure of shops and other things. Some Ghanaians virtually becoming front in the ownership of these shops, preventing the foreigners from. No, these are my problems.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for the clarification. It is true that we've had challenges with the invasion of foreigners, particularly in our retail trade, which, according to the regulations, was supposed to be reserved for Ghanaians. I believe that it is a matter of enforcement of existing regulations. I'm aware that the previous government made efforts in this direction. Somehow, I'm not sure that we've been able to harvest the kind of results that we need to have. So we still see that invasion going on. And I would be committed to ensuring that we work with other agencies who first have the responsibility to ensure that people who are entering into the country are doing so on the basis of what they declare they are going to do, and then make sure that also once they are here, that the security agencies who are supposed to enforce, the compliance with immigration laws actually do their work. So it's a long-standing issue. I'm also aware that it's being pursued along diplomatic channels, but we can only continue to intensify our efforts to make sure that those areas that are reserved for Ghanaians continue to be reserved for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Chairman, my question to the honorable nominee has to do with the demand for the products that will be produced. You've talked about the export end of the market. That's good, but I'm asking if for the success of these factories, the local market, you have some policy tools you would want to deploy to ensure local demand as well for the success of the industrialization effort. Thank you.
First, honorable member, is to ensure that we have a very aggressive program to promote made in Ghana goods. And I think during our term in office, we made a good start. It was continued to some extent by the previous government, and I'm committed to intensify this promotional campaign for made in Ghana goods. I think that's the starting point. Obviously, we also intend to use government procurement and local content regulation to make sure that as long as government is buying goods using taxpayers' money, that they will be encouraged to buy made in Ghana goods. So that's government procurement supporting locally manufactured products.
Honorable Chairman, my next question is that considering traditional processing companies like cocoa processing companies, we have a case in Takoradi where WAMCO is currently defunct, and for the past 3 years, it hasn't really produced. Would you consider them under the One District, One Factory program? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I think that gives us a very good example of a potentially viable but distressed company that could qualify to become a district enterprise. And hopefully that should be one of the companies that we'll be auditing initially. And then if it fits within the criteria, then I would have no reservation in using that as one of the district enterprises, maybe metropolitan enterprises.
Thank you. My last question. For the role venture capital funds play, and we have the Ghana Venture Capital Trust Fund, for the role they play in financing startups and support enterprise development, would you consider assigning some critical role to them to strengthen the financing base for your program?
Honorable Member, I think that venture capital will be an important component of the range of financing interventions that we want to introduce. But I think the challenge we have is to use our venture capital fund, which is currently only being capitalized by government, as an instrument for supporting the financing needs of companies. We're looking at a massive need for capital injection. So if we intend still to use the venture capital fund, then I believe we need to have other private sector investors who would work with the government to expand the base of the venture fund so that they can support the companies more.
Honorable Ayekoo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me also join colleagues to congratulate Honorable Alan Chairman for the nomination. My 3 questions, one will be purely local, related to my constituents, and I think that is what I'll lead with. About 2 weeks ago, I was in Kumasi and also in Accra, touring areas where my constituents are. They mentioned one major problem. Those of them in the cattle business and slaughterhouses at Mayanka in Kumasi, I'm sure you are very familiar with those locations. And here in Accra at Foyo, and then also at Ashama. They have a problem, which is that we have opened our borders so wide, and everybody is importing frozen beef. And because of that, the slaughterhouses are reducing in terms of their economic impacts. Beef and maize to hurt these local actors.
Honorable Member, I that we will support locally produced agricultural and manufactured goods to every extent possible. If we say that, then it means that we are prepared to support them to be able to compete even within our own local market. Obviously, it is not prudent to make a declaration that will ban imports of commodities into the country because of the implications, as I'm sure you are aware. But the position that we have adopted, as we did in our previous term of office, that we will support our local companies to be able to compete, which is what is done by all countries. Secondly, we would also ensure that we take safeguard measures to prevent the dumping of substandard goods into our country. So that may have implications for what your constituents are talking about. But also just to indicate that if you take the livestock development issue that you addressed, the previous Zuarungu factory that was established during Nkrumah's regime had a capacity to slaughter 100 heads of cattle every day. 100 heads of cattle every day. So we can imagine the potential in either reviving that particular factory or helping a particular entrepreneur or investor to establish a new one. I believe that that will be one of the solutions to the problem that your constituents are talking about. In respect of grains, we all appreciate the difficulties with our grain marketing generally in this country. But during the previous government, there was an effort to establish a commodity exchange, a Ghana commodity exchange, which will support the marketing of grains in particular. So we will continue with that effort and then make sure that we are not just supporting the production of local grains, but we are also helping them to market those grains. And that obviously then reduces the import of competitive products from other countries.
Thank you. Second question. I used to be Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry. And one of the problems I recall having is for cocoa processing factories every year to come complaining that they don't even have access to cocoa beans to process. And I'll run to the finance minister and he will do a simple calculation for me, the amount of money he will earn selling the cocoa beans relative to the number of workers that the factories employed and the amount of value addition that took place and its economic value to him as finance minister, and virtually chased me out of his office. I, at that time, advocated for the liberalization of the cocoa sector. This morning on my way here, I listened to radio, I think either City FM or Joy FM, and I heard the voice of a lady, I don't recall the name, who said if there's one thing she will ask for from this government, she will ask for the liberalization of the cocoa sector so that it can attract all the investments needed, both for its production, marketing, processing, and instead of government looking for money every year itself to invest in the sector, it is an attractive sector by itself to be able to attract its investments. As Minister for Trade and Industry, will you advocate for the liberalization of the cocoa sector?
Thank you, Honorable Member. Again, at the risk of saying something which may not necessarily coincide with what my colleague, the Minister Designate for Agriculture, will be talking about, I would say that because 70% of the value of every chocolate bar goes to the processors. And so literally we are surrendering 70% of the value of what we produce to foreign processors. And I think that it will be a major transition for our government if we start looking not so much only in respect of foreign companies who are establishing cocoa processing factories in this country, which is very useful. I mean, there's no doubt that they have the technology, the experience. But we must start encouraging local investors also to take advantage of the processing of cocoa beans. And if that has to survive, then obviously it makes sense that you have to liberalize the cocoa industry, so that people can actually import and feed their factories, and also us make sure that we have enough cocoa beans to support our processing companies.
My last question is, you have spoken a lot about establishing industries. That's the ideal of every government. You have been involved in the past in trying to establish industries, many of whom collapsed, some after you have left office, and subsequent ministers of trade and industry tried to revive those factories. And some with limited success, others still struggling. Do you recognize that the ability of industrialization to take place is a function of a system-wide reforms, which systems have been clearly spelled out almost annually in the Global Competitiveness Index of what countries really need to do to be able to be competitive, both by way of attracting investors, both by way of making sure that their products access the global market, both by way of making sure that they attract greater capital and etc. So it's a system-wide thing, not just limited to what you, Minister for Trade and Industry, will, can, or may do. Do you recognize that limitation that trade and industry ministers suffer? And therefore, do you realize that your real mandate is to make sure that every other sector does its work? If you site a factory in Boku and there's no electricity there, the price of the product will be so high, if we're going to use generators, that no consumer will prefer that product to one coming from China, which will be a fraction of that price. The same way, if the quality of skills of workers who may want to reside in Boku and work is so low, there's no way your factory can function efficiently, and so on, financial intermediation and what technologies used and etc. And all these are under other sector ministers. So the question is, do you realize the limitation of the Minister for Trade and Industry, and how do you factor that in the work that you will be doing?
Thank you, Honorable Member. I do. I do very much recognize the limitations on the minister and his functionaries in the ministry. In actual fact, you are speaking to the converted. You are pleading my case for me. In other countries, the way they've resolved this is to turn the Ministry of Trade and Industry into more or less like a super ministry, where particularly for a country like ours that is now using the narrative of industrial transformation, clearly it must have a pivotal role, and that enables it to deal with the intersectoral collaboration that you are talking about. But be that as it may, within the context of what we have agreed to do, I will seek to do a number of things. One is to collaborate and cooperate with my other colleagues in all sectors. And when I say I will do that, it is not just as a personal effort, because I'm not personalizing the effort, but to establish intersectoral working groups, which then will help facilitate that collaboration. Secondly, is to have the President, His Excellency the President, establish an intersectoral ministerial group that will then also reinforce and deepen this collaboration. And then thirdly, also, for me as an individual, to be a personal advocate for why it is important that we have this kind of collaboration. But you could not have put it any better, that all the what we normally describe as the ecosystem for industrial development, that is what you are leading to. So we'll make the best out of the situation.
Esla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Honorable Nominee. We have a factory which has been sitting idle largely for want of raw materials. And I'm talking about the Commander Sugar Factory. And my question is to do with the sugar industry generally. And I'll ask it in 3 parts. It's just on the sugar industry, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me. It's one question. Thank you. What are you going to do to make sure that it's operationalized and we derive value from the investment that we've made in there? And while at it, in our bid, do you think that we need to promote the sugar industry generally? Do we need legislation to regulate it? I did hear the Mauritius delegation to the inauguration also promise or pledge that if we requested it, they would support us to set up many sugar factories around the country. Is it something that you would want to take up in view of the amount of money that we spend importing sugar annually?
Honorable Member, my brief on the Commander Sugar Factory is that government initiated a process of divesting 70% of its shares in the Commander Sugar Factory. I think it's the right thing to do once the factory has been established. I don't think we are in a position to make a judgment on whether it was the right thing to do at that time. But once it has been established, I think the right thing to do is to bring in private sector participation. My understanding is that a process has been initiated and intend to review that process and have it completed. Secondly, my understanding is that the defect that has been occasioned by not having a plantation developed to precede the establishment of the factory is being cured by the, I think there's a loan that has been approved by Parliament, $24 million to establish a plantation to support the factory. I think that is also in the right direction. Hopefully, that government would also bring in private sector participation in the plantation development. And more importantly, also to involve the farmers and make sure that they are given part of the shareholding in both the processing facility and then the plantation development. So I'm fully in support of that. Now to the second issue that you raised, I think government ought to be interested in reducing our import bill for
it is a ministry or not.
I think his position was clear, that the person nominated is a minister of state at the office of the president. What is not clear about that?
I was talking about the specific roles that they are to play. Because, Mr. Chairman,
let's not it be an argument between us. I think he gave a role. Is there anything that you don't understand in what he said that you want to clarify?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You are correct. Perfectly right. I want to understand whether he's going to play the same role as the senior minister.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my understanding is as follows. The senior minister has been given responsibility for coordinating line ministries that the president has oversight responsibility for all the things that happen in our ministries, but particularly for the things that are dear to his transformation agenda. It is understandable that he has a liaison or a focal point officer that reports directly. In this case, I'm not talking about all the economics. I'm talking about what is related to my ministry. Now, so the senior minister is talking about coordinating line ministries, and then this one is is in respect of liaison between my ministry and then the presidency. So
of this your nomination, and we are confident that you would deliver on the job. But there are a few key issues relating to industry development and trade in the 3 northern regions of Ghana I want to bring to your attention. The Ghana Investment Climate Assessment has it that the 3 northern regions is ranked worst in the country in terms of access to finance. There is a proposal before government for the establishment of a Savannah Investment and Development Bank. In my view, the establishment will anchor the industrial development of the 3 northern regions. Is it your view that this bank will get the support of your ministry to ensure the take off of the northern industrial development? The bank.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Member, my understanding is that if everything goes according to plan, then this proposed bank, which will be aligned to SADA or the Northern Development Authority, would become a major financing instrument to support, for example, the one district, one factory initiative, particularly for the 3 northern regions. Because if we look at the financing that is required for an industrial enterprise, there's equity, then there's debt capital. Now, hopefully, even if government did not put any money, that's equity, direct equity in these establishments, and an investor provides all the equity, they will still need additional financing to support that particular enterprise. And this is where I think that bank